The holiday season. Cheerful decorations, laughter, and the promise of warmth in the coldest months of the year. But beneath the glow of twinkling lights lies the untold terror of a darker side to Christmas. The people in these stories sought nothing more than holiday joy. What they found instead was a descent into fear, despair, and the inescapable clutches of the unknown. Brace yourselves, for you are about to step into tales of terror that remind us, not all gifts are meant to be unwrapped. These three brave souls thought they were celebrating the season, but instead, they entered the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. Snow fell heavily as I navigated the winding road to the mountain cabin, my tires crunching over the fresh layer that seemed to thicken by the minute. The dense pines lining the road loomed tall and foreboding, their branches sagging under the weight of the storm. The couple who hired me, an affluent pair named the Whitmores, had promised an easy gig watch over their luxurious cabin while they spent the holidays in Tahiti.
It's a simple job,
Mr. Whitmore had assured me, passing over the keys and a thick wad of cash. Feed the cat, keep the place warm, and don't answer the door to strangers after dark. I laughed at the odd warning, but his serious expression unsettled me. Still, I was in no position to question a paycheck this good. I needed the cash, and I needed the distraction. Christmas wasn't exactly my favorite time of year since my parents had passed. Spending it alone in a posh, snow-covered retreat seemed like the perfect escape. By the time I arrived, the cabin was barely visible through the swirling white flakes. It sat perched on a ridge, a fortress of wood and stone overlooking a frozen valley. Inside, it was a paradise of rustic luxury. A roaring fireplace, thick woolen blankets, and shelves stocked with enough food to last me weeks. The only downside was the cat, a grumpy old thing that only emerged to glare at me before retreating under the sofa. The first night passed uneventfully, and I quickly fell into a routine. During the day, I shoveled the walk and kept the fire going. At night, I buried myself in a book or scrolled mindlessly through my phone, the storm outside a constant reminder of my isolation. It was peaceful in its way, until the third night. I was nestled in the armchair by the fire, a thick blanket draped over me, when I heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining things. A melody carried on the wind. I muted the playlist on my phone, straining to listen. The singing was soft, barely audible, but unmistakably there. Decked the halls with boughs of holly, the voices crooned, their harmonies almost too perfect. The sound sent a chill down my spine. The cabin was miles from civilization, and the snowstorm had only grown worse since nightfall. Who could possibly be out there? I got up and moved to the window, my breath fogging the glass as I peered into the storm. The porch light illuminated the swirling snow, but little else. The driveway was untouched, no footprints or tire tracks disturbing the pristine blanket of white. The singing continued, growing louder and clearer. I could almost make out individual voices now. Men, women, and children blending together in cheerful unison. My stomach knotted as the melody twisted, the harmonies souring into something discordant. Then came the knock. It was sharp and deliberate, 3 quick raps that echoed through the cabin. My heart leapt into my throat. The Whitmore's words rang in my ears.
Don't answer the door to strangers after dark.
"Who's there?" I called, my voice unsteady. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice, sweet and lilting.
"We're carolers, sir. Won't you let us in?"
The rational part of me screamed that this wasn't possible. No one would travel through a blizzard to sing carols at a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Peeking through the curtain, I saw only the empty porch, snow piling against the doorframe. "Sorry," I called out, trying to keep my voice firm. "You should leave. It's dangerous out there." The response was immediate. A chorus of laughter erupted outside, high-pitched and brittle, like glass shattering. The laughter faded into whispers, words I couldn't quite make out, but they set my nerves on edge. The knock came again, louder this time. The doorknob rattled, as though someone was testing it. My heart raced as I backed away. The fire poker leaned against the hearth, and I grabbed it without thinking, clutching it tightly as if it could shield me from whatever was outside. The knocking turned to pounding, each blow reverberating through the cabin. Then came the scraping, long, deliberate scratches against the wood, accompanied by a low, guttural hum. I retreated upstairs, locking myself in the master bedroom. The pounding ceased, replaced by the faint sound of singing once more. The melody spiraled into a haunting cacophony, overlapping voices creating an otherworldly dissonance. The hours dragged by in tense silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the poker and staring at the door. Sleep was impossible. Each creak of the cabin sent my heart into overdrive. When the first pale light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I finally mustered the courage to venture downstairs. The front door was slightly ajar, snow blowing across the floor. My breath hitched as I spotted something on the porch. A box, wrapped in festive paper and tied with a blood-red ribbon, sat perfectly centered on the welcome mat. My name was scrawled across the top in neat, childlike handwriting. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, dread curling in my gut. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The box was light, almost weightless, but the moment I touched it, a chill shot through my arm. The singing began again, faint and distant, as though carried on the wind. I dropped the box and stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. The singing grew louder, pressing against the walls of the cabin. It was coming from all directions now, surrounding me. The cat emerged from its hiding spot, yowling and puffing up its fur. It darted to the window, hissing at something outside. My stomach twisted as I followed its gaze. Figures were emerging from the storm, dozens of them, their outlines barely visible through the swirling snow. They moved slowly, deliberately, their heads tilted as though listening to some unheard rhythm. I backed away, the poker trembling in my hands. The singing reached a deafening crescendo, and the figures pressed closer, their shadowy forms swaying in time with the haunting melody. The windows rattled, the door creaked, and then all at once, the singing stopped. Silence enveloped the cabin, thick and suffocating. I stood there, paralyzed, until the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds. When I dared to look outside again, the figures were gone, their footprints erased by the wind. The box remained where I had dropped it, its ribbon fluttering in the breeze. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know what was inside. I left the cabin that afternoon, abandoning the job and everything I'd brought with me. The Whitmores never called to ask why, and I never offered an explanation. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my apartment, I hear faint echoes of singing, and I wonder if they'll come knocking again. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked through the silent streets of Oak Hollow, the town I once called home. 15 years had passed since I'd last seen it, but the sight of the old stone bridge and the narrow tree-lined roads stirred memories I thought I'd buried long ago. Christmas lights hung in sparse clusters, their dim glow barely cutting through the evening fog. Something felt wrong here, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The warmth of the holidays was missing, replaced by a heaviness in the air, as if the town itself was mourning. I had come back for closure. My father had passed earlier in the year, and with him gone, I was free from the expectations that had always drawn me back during Christmas. Still, there was a pull to this place. It wasn't nostalgia. It was Jason. Jason and I had been best friends growing up, inseparable during summers and holidays. But everything changed one Christmas Eve when he vanished. We had been playing in the woods behind his house, chasing each other through the snow when he'd heard something. A bell, faint and musical, ringing through the trees. Jason had run toward the sound, laughing, and I'd followed. But then he was gone. Everyone said he'd fallen through the ice on Pinewood Lake, though no body was ever recovered. I had been the last person to see him, but I couldn't explain what had happened. Over the years, the memory grew fuzzy, details slipping away, but one thing remained clear: the bells. The streets were empty as I approached the cemetery on the hill. The wrought iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound cutting through the stillness. Jason's headstone was simple and weather-worn, the letters of his name nearly illegible. Someone had left a wreath of holly, its berries bright against the snow. I knelt to brush away the frost, my breath fogging in the frigid air. And then I heard it. The bells. They rang softly at first, a distant haunting melody carried on the wind. My chest tightened as I stood, scanning the cemetery. The sound was coming from the woods at the edge of the graveyard, the same woods where Jason and I had played as children. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was just the church bells from town, but something about the melody felt wrong. "Jason?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The bells grew louder, the notes chiming in a rhythm that tugged at my memory. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity, before stepping toward the woods. The snow deepened as I entered the tree line, muffling my footsteps. The bells seemed to guide me, pulling me deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with each step. The trees crowded closer, their skeletal branches intertwining above me. I felt a growing unease, as though the forest itself was watching. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The bells stopped abruptly. I froze, straining to listen, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. And then, ahead of me, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a boy, dressed in a red coat, his back to me. Snow clung to his shoulders, and his head tilted slightly, as if he'd heard something. My heart lurched. "Jason?" The boy turned slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Jason, or at least, it looked like him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, as though he were carved from ice. He smiled faintly, the expression unnerving in its stillness.
You came back,
He said, his voice soft and layered, as though someone else were speaking through him. I took a step back, but my foot slipped on the icy ground, sending me sprawling. Jason, or the thing that wore his face, didn't move, but the smile grew wider, stretching unnaturally across his face.
Why didn't you follow me?
He asked, his voice laced with sadness and accusation. I didn't know where you went, I stammered, my words catching in my throat. The trees around us groaned, their branches bending under the weight of the snow. The air thickened, and I felt an overwhelming pressure, like the forest itself was closing in. Jason tilted his head, his gaze piercing through me.
You could have saved me,
he whispered. The ground beneath me cracked, and I realized with growing horror that I was standing on the frozen surface of Pinewood Lake. The ice splintered, dark veins spreading outward with each passing second. Jason, The bells rang out again, louder and more insistent, their melody twisting into a discordant wail. Jason stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural. His hand reached for me, his fingers blackened and frostbitten. I scrambled backward, the ice groaning beneath my weight. The surface gave way, plunging me into the freezing water. The shock stole the breath from my lungs as I clawed at the ice, desperate for a grip. Above me, Jason peered down, his expression unreadable.
I waited for you,
he said, his voice echoing in my head.
I waited, but you never came.
Darkness closed in as the cold seeped into my bones. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Jason's face, his smile stretching impossibly wide. I woke up on the shore, coughing and gasping for air. The sky was pale with dawn, and the forest was silent once more. There was no sign of Jason, no sign of the ice I had fallen through. I staggered back to town, my clothes frozen stiff, and my mind reeling. No one believed me when I told them what had happened. They said I must have fallen asleep in the woods, that the cold had made me hallucinate. But I know what I saw. And every Christmas since, I've heard the bells. They call to me, beckoning me back to the woods. One day, I fear, I won't be able to resist. I found the box on Christmas Eve, buried deep in the attic beneath old blankets and dusty photo albums. I hadn't been looking for anything specific, just rummaging through the clutter in a half-hearted attempt to distract myself. It was my first Christmas without Ellen, my wife of 15 years, and the silence in the house felt unbearable. The attic was freezing, the single bulb overhead casting long shadows across the piles of forgotten belongings. My fingers brushed the edge of the box, and I tugged it free from the debris. It was small and unassuming, wrapped in faded red paper and tied with a frayed green ribbon. I carried it downstairs to the living room, setting it on the coffee table beside the half-decorated Christmas tree. The ornaments we'd collected together over the years were scattered around the room, each one a painful reminder of holidays gone by. But something about this box drew my attention. The paper tore easily, revealing an ornate wooden case with a brass latch. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, nestled in a bed of yellowed tissue paper, were a dozen ornaments. They were beautiful, delicate glass figurines in the shapes of angels, snowflakes, and stars, their surfaces catching the light and shimmering like tiny jewels. At the center of the collection was a hand-carved wooden Santa, its painted eyes gleaming with an uncanny lifelike quality. Ellen had always loved finding unique decorations, scouring antique shops and flea markets for anything that caught her eye. I couldn't remember ever seeing these before, but it felt like something she would have picked up and tucked away, saving them for just the right moment. I carefully hung the ornaments on the tree, placing the Santa at the top as the crowning piece. It wasn't much, but it made the room feel less empty. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, I sat alone with a glass of whiskey, staring at the tree. The ornaments seemed to glow faintly, their colors shifting subtly in the flickering light. It was comforting at first, a welcome distraction from the grief that weighed heavy on my chest. But as the hours wore on, an unease crept in. The room felt colder, despite the roaring fire, and the shadows cast by the tree seemed to stretch farther than they should. I blamed the whiskey and fatigue, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. As I passed the tree, I paused, my eyes drawn to the wooden Santa. Its painted eyes seemed to follow me, a trick of the light I couldn't shake. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, leaving the unease behind me, or so I thought. The first sound woke me around 3 a.m. It was faint at first, a soft tinkling like wind chimes. I sat up in bed, listening intently. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, and I realized it was coming from the living room. My heart thudded in my chest as I crept downstairs. The tree was illuminated by the faint glow of the ornaments, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the walls. But what froze me in place was the movement. The ornaments were swaying gently, as if caught in a breeze, though the air was still. The wooden Santa's eyes seemed brighter, almost glowing in the dim light. I stepped closer, my skin prickling with unease. The faint chime of the ornaments grew louder, their movements more frantic, until they were spinning wildly on their hooks. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table, as a deep chuckle echoed through the room. The voice whispered, low and mocking. The wooden Santa's grin seemed to stretch impossibly wide, its painted lips curling into a sneer. The other ornaments began to crack, thin fractures spiderwebbing across their surfaces. One by one, the glass figures shattered, their shards hovering in midair like jagged stars. The light from the tree dimmed, and the air grew thick and oppressive. I turned and bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding. The laughter followed me, echoing through the house, a cacophony of voices overlapping and growing louder. In my bedroom, I locked the door and pushed a dresser against it, my chest heaving as I tried to steady my breathing. The house fell silent once more, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat in the corner, clutching a flashlight, waiting for dawn. When the first light of morning seeped through the curtains, I ventured cautiously downstairs. The tree stood as it had the night before, the shattered ornaments now intact, their surfaces flawless. The wooden Santa sat at the top, its expression placid, its eyes dull and lifeless once more. I considered throwing the entire tree out, but a strange compulsion stopped me. It felt as though the ornaments were watching, waiting for my next move. The next few days were filled with unease. Each night, the tinkling began anew, and the ornaments seemed to glow brighter. I started hearing whispers, faint and unintelligible, that grew louder the closer I got to the tree. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the wooden Santa, intending to burn it in the fireplace. As I held it, the air around me turned icy, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The voices demanded, their tone both pleading and menacing. I stumbled back, dropping the Santa to the floor. It landed upright, its eyes glaring at me with a malevolent glint. That night, I packed my bags and left the house, unable to endure another moment in its presence. I stayed in a motel, far from the tree and its cursed ornaments, hoping distance would bring peace. But even now, I hear the whispers in my dreams, and the faint chime of glass echoes in my ears. The wooden Santa's grin haunts me, A reminder that some gifts should never be unwrapped. And there you have it. 3 tales of holiday horror to make you think twice about the season's cheer. Remember, not all gifts are a blessing, and not every caroler brings joy. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, good night, sleep tight, if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.